I'm good. All right. We're live. Are we live? We're, oh, am I? Well, it must be something off with the camera. Yeah, there you go. Well, good morning. How are you? That's all right. Oh, it was built in 1979, and it was finished around February. I know because we were the first marriage in it, and it was in March of '79. And I remember that. All right, good morning. We're still in chapter 20, or section 20, or whatever we call that one. But we're in the Passion Week, so we'll be in this one for the next five chapters that we have. But we're going to finish one up. Turn this on, it works a lot better. So, who should we pay taxes to? Boy, that is perfect for this time of year, isn't it? Everybody, who should we pay taxes to? Okay. So, yeah, Caesar. The scribes and chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, and yet they feared the people, for they were aware that he had spoken this parable against them. And so they watched him closely and sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement, so that they could hand him over to the jurisdiction and the authority of the governor. So what parables did he talk about? What parables had we just studied? Kind of what was the theme of those parables? The husbandman and the people that looked in the vineyard, and the one that Doug taught last week. Yeah, okay. And then you had the first one also that was the same theme that was all through. Okay. God put his people in place. He put the leadership there. He expected the leadership to guide them towards God, to grow them towards God. And he sent prophets to help them. And they killed the prophets, and they jailed the prophets, and they beat the prophets. And the leadership has put barriers up between God and the people. They've done a horrible job. That's what he just talked about. And they knew he's talking about us. And they said, well, we're going to do something about it. We're going to trip him up. So what did they decide to do instead of arrest him? Try to what?
They're going to trap him.
Try to trap him, yeah. And who is it that you're trying to trap and send him to? Pontius Pilate. He's the governor, right? Not the king. Herod's son is one of the Herod's sons is the king in that area, Judea. But the governor is Pontius Pilate. And they're trying to figure out a way to send him to Pontius Pilate. So they want to catch him in something that the Romans aren't going to like first, which is where we get to with Mickey mentioned. They sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth." You can see him really trying to butter him up. "And do not care what anyone thinks, for you are not partial to anyone. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it permissible to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not?" So who were those they sent disciples of? It says they sent the disciples to him. Whose disciples were they?
Yes. Yes.
Whose?
God.
No. Disciples of the Pharisees. the ones that followed them. Who are the Herodians? I kind of gave it away on the last slide, I thought. Who was sitting on the throne? Who was the king at that time? Or the kings throughout Israel? Sons of Herod, okay? Herod's dead. Herod the Great, who tried to kill Jesus when he was 2 years old, he's dead. But his 4 sons, they call them the 4 areas, one in Galilee, there's one in Judea, there's 2 others that sit on the thrones. So these are disciples of the Herodians. What had one Herod already done that affected Jesus? Killed John the Baptist. Okay? Remember, Herodias had her daughter dance in front of Herod, and Herod said, "What do you want? I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom." She said, "Head of John the Baptist." Okay, so that's what kind of people they were. So how did they present their question to Jesus? Would you call that sincere or insincere? Yeah. Yeah, well, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God and truth. Did they really believe that? No. You're just a troublemaker. So what was the question designed to provide them? Controversy. Or the wrong answer, an answer that no one could agree with. If he said, "Don't give it to Caesar," they could give him to Pontius Pilate because he said, "Don't pay taxes." If he says, "Give it to Caesar," the people hated the Romans. So it could turn the people against them. So they said, it's a win-win. Doesn't matter what he says, we'll be able to win. But Jesus perceived their malice and said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarii. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Then pay to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And I've got a coin there. So how do you know their intent? Knew it was in their hearts, didn't he? He knew where they came from. He knew whose disciples they were or who they were aligned with. And what they had said was totally disingenuous. They'd already tried, and they're not done, but they're going to be done here real quick. So what's equivalent in wages for a denarii? It's a day, okay? So this is a bonus one. Whose emperor's likeness is in the coin on the right? It's Augustus Caesar, okay? Who's the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus right now? Augustus was a Caesar when Jesus was a child. Remember your history? Titus. Titus is the Roman emperor right now. But you can see the name Augustus and the likeness of their face on the coin. Every emperor had his own face and his name on every coin, a denarii that was out there, so everybody knew who he was. I'm the emperor. You make sure you understand who I am. So he gave them an answer. And they were unable to catch him in a statement in the presence of the people. And they were amazed at his answer and said nothing. I mean, they were stunned. And Matthew adds a little bit, and hearing this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. So that first group, the disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians, said, "We're done. We're amazed. We have no comeback to that. The people that were listening, who was there? Where was he doing this at? He was doing it at the temple. It was filled. This was Herod's temple. It was huge. It could have hundreds of people there in the Herod's temple because it was huge. And so there was all these people that some of them were being healed, but they were also being taught. And they were listening to this banter going back and forth between the Jewish leadership and Jesus. And they were amazed at Jesus' answer. So that's the setting. So what did they do after he got his answer? We're done. We're finished. That group's done. So, marriage and the resurrection. On that day, some Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and questioned. So now we have the second group. There's a little bit more to Luke. Now, some of the Sadducees who maintain there is no resurrection came to him, and they questioned him, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife, and he is childless, that his brother is to marry the wife and raise up children for his brother." So who's the next group that tried to catch him?
Sadducees.
The Sadducees. Oops. So what law are they referring to? Mosaic law, okay. Got any idea where you'd find where they're talking about?
Leviticus, Numbers, Leviticus.
It's in Deuteronomy. It's in chapter 25. Actually, it has more in here, but I just wrote the part of it that was most relevant. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside of the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall have relations with her and take her to himself as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall then be that the firstborn to whom she gives birth shall assume the name of the father's deceased brother, so that the name will not be wiped out from Israel. So what was this law, as it was given, designed to do?
Lineage.
Carry the lineage on, okay? Make sure that name get carried on in the Jewish family, okay? And it was, as we know, the heritage, all the way back, tracing back to, basically, if you could get it to Adam, was a big deal with the Jews, okay? Certainly, lineage was a big deal. So this was designed to continue the lineage. That was the whole point behind this. But lineage is associated with what? Why do you have lineage that you're concerned with people who follow on from you? Because you're not going to live forever, right? Eventually, we're all going to die someday. And we have someone who lives on after us, and after them, because that's the world we live in. That's relevant because of Jesus' answer. Jesus' answer takes that into account and says, you need to understand. Now, there were 7 brothers among us, and the first married and died, and having no children, left his wife to his brother. It was the same also with the second brother, and the third, and the 7th. I think we'd start looking into this woman by now, but they didn't. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had her in marriage. So again, the Sadducees have reasoned through and said, we've got him. There's no answer to this. There's no good answer. So what shows the lack of sincerity in asking the question?
Obviously, her cooking was so bad it killed 6 husbands.
That's true.
So they don't have to eat her cooking in heaven, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, they didn't believe in the resurrection to begin with. Yeah, that's the lack of insincerity, and their whole posed question is to say, you really don't believe in what you're saying anyhow. And that reflects in their hypocrisy too, doesn't it? Okay. But Jesus answered them, you are mistaken, since you do not understand the Scriptures, nor the power of God. What are they missing as far as the Scriptures and the power of God?
Possibly both.
Well, they're missing both. What is it they're missing? What are they missing from the Scriptures? What was the intent of that Scriptures in Deuteronomy?
To take care of her. To take care of her, she wouldn't have a job, she wouldn't have wealth, she wouldn't have, it was there to take care of her.
No, it was there for the lineage. It was there for the lineage because people die. What do people do in the resurrection? They're raised to new life. They live eternally. You don't understand the Scriptures. You've misapplied them. What about the power of God?
Son.
Huh?
Sarah bore a son in her old age. They're missing the power of God too.
The power of God can bring a child to anyone. He brought a child to Mary. Okay? He will provide. You don't understand. You don't understand the power of God and what He can do. And you don't understand the Scriptures that He was given to you. Because you don't understand the difference between the new age and the resurrection and this age where we're at. You just don't understand. Jesus said to them, the sons of this age marry, and the women are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot even die anymore. For they are like angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. So it gives the answer here. What age is Jesus referring to?
New heaven and new earth.
New heaven and new earth, yeah. It's after the judgment. It's the resurrection. I talked about it when I preached a couple weeks ago, was you have the first people that are brought up, and then you have the second ones, the ones that are aligned to God's and the ones that are aligned against God. Why do those in the resurrection neither marry nor are given in marriage? There's no need to procreate, to continue lineage. Nobody dies. Nobody dies in the resurrection. Everybody's alive. You don't need to.
Yeah, they changed lineages there. I mean, they are sons of God, they are sons of the resurrection. That's the lineage they take on.
Yeah. Is different in the resurrection. But as for the fact that the dead are raised, now he's going to get at the Sadducees on this one. Even Moses revealed this in the passage about the burning bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. But he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. And then in Matthew it adds, when the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. Oops. So why does Jesus refer to the dead being raised in his response? Now he's directly responding to the Sadducees.
It's a teaching moment.
It's a teaching moment. Yep. You don't understand, Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection. Look at Moses. A lot of the scribes were Sadducees. Some of the scribes were Pharisees. You that study these scriptures so much, you studied the scripture enough to know about Deuteronomy, but you don't understand the scriptures. Did you just ignore the part where Moses talked about that? That he's the God of the living, not the dead? So how did Jesus' answer make it even more difficult for the Jewish leadership to trap him. All these people are listening to this. The first group crushed it. Second group crushed it again. And they're all astonished. They're all listening to this teaching. And they're running out of ways to try and trap him. So we go to the third. What is the greatest commandment? But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? So now you have the third group. The first group was the disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians. The second group was the Sadducees. Now you've got the Pharisee leadership that's come in. And in Mark, one of the scribes, we know he's a Pharisee and he's a scribe. One of the scribes came up and heard them arguing, and recognizing that he had answered them well, he asked him, what commandment is foremost of all? So it's what you have in Mark and Matthew is basically the same. So he's a lawyer, a Pharisee, and a scribe. So he's well versed in the scriptures. Very well versed. And he's a lawyer. So he's used to arguing a point. So I already answered that one. Why did he pose the question he did? What's so good about this question from a standpoint of the scribes and the Pharisees?
It's a trap.
It's a trap. How's it a trap? How many commandments are there in the law? How many commandments were given on Mount Sinai? 10. How many were given in the law? A few hundred? Can a lawyer argue, well, the one you picked was this and it should have been this? You kind of see his reasoning is to say, whatever he says, I can argue it. It doesn't matter.
If you violate one law, you're guilty of all of it. They have to be the same.
But he says, what's the greatest? And it's an opinion, he thinks. He doesn't understand the law. He understands what they are. He can tell you what all the laws are. He can argue about all the laws. But he doesn't understand what's behind the laws, does he? That's why he asked this question. Jesus answered, the foremost is, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And then in Matthew, upon these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. So what does Jesus' answer provide as far as insight into the commandments from God? What insight does it provide?
Laws are based on.
Yeah. The underpinnings for all law is love. And honoring God with all your soul, all your mind, all your heart, but love him with all your soul. You know, the underpinning for everything is love of God and love of each other. Everything else is built on that, as far as the commandments, is to help you love God, to help you love one another. And he didn't understand that. And the scribe said to him, well said, teacher, you have truly stated that he is one, and there is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that the man answered intelligently, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And then no one dared any longer to question him. So what shows how impressed the Pharisee, lawyer, scribe was with Jesus' answer?
for him to try and refute the answer that he got. So he took a gracious exit.
He took a gracious exit, but didn't he look at it and he said, you just showed me something I didn't see. The answer you gave me better understanding of the whole system of laws that God gave us, which at that point he didn't have. John.
Coming in with the expectation of, I'm going to trap this man, we're going to get him.
Yeah.
And then everyone's going to stop believing what he says, and then he calls him teacher.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for a guy that seems to know just about everything about the law.
Yeah. He changes his whole point that he's there for. He recognizes that indeed he's been taught. He's been taught something he didn't know. And he recognizes there's something different about this guy. So what was the result of these three confrontations?
Up against the wall and none of it stuck.
Three strikes and you're out. They quit. They stopped trying to catch him and trap him. At this particular point, they said, we can't trap him. Plan B.
The crowd that was there saw the evidence, and I think it would have helped them to believe more.
It did. It certainly, when you saw the Jewish leadership, and particularly this particular individual here who says, wow, that was a great answer. You gave me more insight into God and my dad. And the whole crowd hears all of this stuff going on. And they're listening to all this stuff. And of course, the leadership's hearing what's going on saying, man, we thought we were in trouble. We're really in trouble now. Alvin?
In Luke 20, after they asked about the 7 brothers, verse 39 says, some of the teachers of the law responded, well said, teacher, and no one dared to ask him any more questions.
Yeah.
It's almost the same.
It's almost the same thing. And that one there would have been, the teachers of the law would have been the Sadducees. Yeah.
He's convincing some of them, evidently, of his knowledge.
His knowledge and his answers. He answered not like, remember when he was 12 and he was reasoning in the synagogue, in the temple? And they said, we can't believe the insight he has. Because I'm sure what was happening in the synagogues and the temple at that time is they'd read a scripture and they'd go, okay. And then they'd maybe chant a song. But nobody explained it. And he sits there and he explains what's behind it. Because he knows his Father. And his Father knows him. So, Jesus' question, they dared not to answer. So now, they've asked their questions. Now he's going to ask some of them. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, so before they ran off, Jesus asked them a question. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He gave him a real fast answer. So what did Jesus do once the Jewish leadership entered there trying to trap him in a response? What did he do?
Acted with his own questions.
He said, I got a question for you. Because it was about who am I? Right? What premise did Jesus have them state that he would reason from that would show their bias?
Lineage?
What's the premise he has them state based on his question? His question is, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? What was the response?
That he's not the Son of God. That he is that he's earthly.
But the premise is, he's the son of David. David was a big deal for the Jews. So they gave him a real fast answer. It's the son of David. That's the premise. Then he says, then how does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. Therefore, if David calls him Lord, how is he his son? See, the premise was he's David's son. So he says, okay, based on that premise, how is it that David calls him Lord and he's his son? See where he's put them? Who is the Lord and who is my Lord that David refers to in this particular, I think it's a psalm. Who's the Lord?
That be God.
The God, which one? Father, Son, and Spirit. Which one? Father. Okay. And who is my Lord? The Son. Okay. So now he's gone through and he's divided up and he says, my Lord is the Son. It's the Christ. But he refers to the Lord that he says is up there sitting next to the Father. Where does Jesus sit today that Stephen saw when he was being stoned to death? Remember when Stephen was being stoned to death? We read in Acts. Huh?
At his right hand of God.
Yeah, he's at the right hand of God. He looked up into heaven and he said he saw Christ sitting at the right hand of the Father. So the vision that Stephen says corresponds to what David wrote way back, a long time before Christ ever came here on this earth. What's the point of Jesus' question? And what illogic is he exposing? We can wait on this one for a while. I only got one more slide. What's the point of his question? What have they been doing so far trying to do with the 3 questions and everything else that they've been doing up until this particular point in Passion Week?
They've been trying to prove that he's not the Son of God.
That's exactly. They've been trying to discredit him, not the Son of God. Remember, he was doing all the miracles, all these good things. He's healing people. He's throwing out demons. He's people who were blind, he's giving them sight. People who couldn't walk. What power did they say he had that done by? Satan, okay? To discredit him, to say he can't be the Messiah. All that's been going on in this entire 3-year period as more and more people believed this is the Messiah. To them, it was obvious. But to the Jewish leadership, they were saying, this guy's a threat. We need to get rid of this guy. So what illogic is he exposing? He said, he can't be the Messiah. Right? Especially when he says something, I was before he was. You know, when he's talking about David. He said, how can you be before David and be the son of David? And their logic is thinking linear. Their logic is thinking earthly, physical, the creation. And Christ is talking about it from both standpoints. He came to the creation, but he existed before the creation, didn't he? Excuse me. How does he describe himself in Revelation? How does Christ describe himself in Revelation?
The Alpha and Omega,
The Alpha and Omega, which is what? In the Greek alphabet.
beginning and end.
The first letter and the last letter. He says, I'm the beginning, I'm the end. The beginning of creation started with Christ speaking it into existence. The end is Christ coming to bring it to final destruction. Okay? He's the Alpha, he's the Omega. But he exists in God's realm, which is eternal. But he came to this one that's physical, that isn't eternal. That's how he could have existed before David and still be the son of David. But their logic was linear. Their logic was all physical. They didn't understand. You had to look at it from a God perspective, not from a man's perspective. And that's the illogic, is they're reasoning from a man's perspective. And Christ is reasoning from God's perspective, a much bigger perspective than they had. And they didn't understand it. They didn't want to understand it, did they? David himself calls him Lord. So in what sense is he son? And the large crowd enjoyed listening to him. And Matthew adds, no one was able to offer a word in answer, nor did anyone dare from that day to ask him any more questions. So he asked this final question. And then he explained it based on their premise to say, you don't understand. You do not understand the Messiah. You do not understand he is Lord. All those things you've been denying about me, I am the Son of David, and I am Lord. And you need to understand how it all fits together. The people were amazed. His answers were tremendous insight into God because he was the Son of God. And they couldn't do anything about it. So it's winding him up for the week when I ask about that. So what are the results of Jesus' question?
Crickets.
Crickets, yeah. Nobody answered him and went, wow, you know. They just listened. And no more questions. No more attacks. No more traps. They're done. So we're going to go into the next one, which is continuing in the Passion Week that's leading up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. But thanks for your attention.